So the purpose of the Department of Defense's climate adaptation plan is outlined in the document in terms of the end state. And that's to ensure that the Department of Defense can operate under all future climate conditions. All right. And we took a very expansive interpretation of adaptation, and we saw this as a call to transform the organization. So for those folks who have looked at the climate adaptation plan, you see that it has 5 lines of effort. Line of effort 3, adapt the built and natural environment is normally the one that people think of in terms of adaptation. But in our plan, we've said we must adapt our decision-making processes. That's the most important thing. So that's line of effort 1. So climate-informed decision-making. Then we have to train and equip a climate-ready force so that our service members and their equipment can operate under anticipated conditions. Right. We then have to build the resilient, natural, and built environment to ensure that our installations are able to operate under all future conditions. 4th is use the power of our supply chain to both sort of stimulate climate resilient industry and make sure our supply chain is climate resilient, as well as to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, the scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions within the supply chain. And then line of effort 4 is a recognition that we can't do this without collaboration and partnerships. So for ADC communities, you should probably be paying attention to line of efforts 3 and 5. All right, so the recognition that the installations need to be resilient, and they should do so in a way that's collaborative and cooperative with our communities. And we have some decision support tools out there, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. White just to describe the Defense Climate Assessment Tool and how we're using that to look at our installations, and by extension, get a little bit of an idea of what's happening in the communities next to them. Dr. White.
Sure, thank you. So the idea of the Defense Climate Assessment Tool is to understand the climate exposure that we're facing now and in the future as we go out over the life cycle of the installation, facilities, and infrastructure. So the tool uses a geospatial indicator approach that gives us a very consistent view across all the installations in the US and our installations abroad. And this allows us to identify the kinds of climate exposure that we might be seeing. So with respect to extreme heat, drought, riverine flooding, coastal flooding, permafrost thaw, and a range of other factors that impact how installations can perform their missions. So the tool has finished its first phase. We produced a report on that last April that provides a great overview of the tool itself and its use. And we're moving on to more installations and more understanding of the sensitivity of those installations to the climate exposures they face. And of course, the defense communities around them are going to face the same kind of exposure.
Dr. White, following up on this climate assessment tool, you said it's being used at certain installations. It's just starting to roll out. How is that actually being implemented on the ground? Is that something that the base commander or his deputy of public works uses, or is that run by an external team member from your office?
So the tool was designed to be used at multiple levels and to help make the climate-informed decisions that Mr. Kidd identified as a first priority, to help everybody understand how to use climate in their own job. So at the overall department level, we're looking comparison-wise at the different installations and the locations associated with them to see what the exposure is and which ones are sensitive to that exposure and what are the steps we might take to reduce that exposure. As you move down, it might be used to help identify which investments in, say, an energy resilience projects might be sited differently on an installation to ensure that they continue to operate. If you look at the installation level, we're working on developing a training and roll this out to the installations, helping them perform a baseline assessment to understand their own climate exposure that can be used in other kinds of threat assessments and in master planning.
And does this work kind of in tandem with the installation resilience plan that OLDCC has been rolling out recently?
Yes, so that's a really good question. So the OLDCC, of course, is a vital part of our work with defense communities. And so the the tool developers have been working with OLDCC to determine if and how we can expand the footprint of the tool to beyond the community for use by the communities. We can certainly work with the communities ourselves to understand how the information might be more useful, but I think the longer term goal is to be able to expand the footprint and then allow the use of this internal tool for the OLDCC communities that are participating in their program.
So in addition to, I guess, understanding, getting that threat assessment, which is obviously an important baseline, what are the next step? What are the tools that a community and installation can then use to begin to address some of their vulnerabilities?
So first of all, I'll jump in here. So just to clarify, so the installation resilience plan is a requirement from Congress. All right. So we as the services will be required to develop resilience plans as part of the master planning process. At the same time, Congress gave OLDCC some additional authorities and money to build resilience out to the community as well. All right. So, and some of the first sort of calls are either coming out or just came out for those sort of community-derived resilience projects. So, for ADC communities, they should become very familiar with that legislation and the particulars of which are at LDCC. Additionally, there's some other tools that we've had in the past that are getting more attention and more funding. So there's the resilient lands activities on our installations and the REPI lands activities adjacent to or close by the installation. So these funds will, for both of those actions, will increase in scope and remit going forward. And those are great tools to build resilience across our natural environment and communities. So communities should think comprehensively about their specific exposures and threats and start to work in concert with the base and use all the tools to help build a more comprehensive approach to resilience. So everything from seagrass, marshland to more resilient infrastructure, redundant power feeds, distributed solar energy production and storage. The list goes on, but those are a variety of things that the communities need to start to think about as they work with a variety of the different programs of the department.
Dr. White, going back to the tool, I know you said you're developing some training, I assume for the installation staff, deputy garrison commanders, DPWs, those types of individuals. Is that training going to be available to, say, the local or state governments outside the fence line?
So I'd say there's a couple pieces to the training. First of all, it's part of the overall climate literacy, which is one of the factors that the strategic enablers in the adaptation plan. And this climate literacy really looks at all the information that people need to do their job. So we're developing several different kinds of training, and certainly the kinds of training that would be useful to the people outside the installation, we can provide that to them. So there's not there's certainly a mechanism to share those kinds of that kind of information in that training.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think, in speaking with OSD and the services and the administration over these past, this past decade, and then really into this administration, it's become, I think, more and more clear that the problems that we face, whether it be climate change or installation resilience or quality of life, all of these things can't be addressed solely within the fence line. So I think this plan embraces that, this idea of this one community effort. So I think our folks really appreciate that. So are there anything, what can our communities be doing right now to help with this? What can the cities, states, and counties around these installations be doing to support this effort right now?
Well, that's a pretty broad question, but I would say that the communities and the states and all the other government structures across the country, need to unite around the science. Okay, Science is real. It's not going away. You can't pretend that climate change isn't happening. So the first and most important step is to acknowledge the reality and embrace the science. And then, and it's, let's be candid, it's hard. I mean, there are certain communities that are going to see their futures significantly degraded because of climate change. That said, there's also some amazing new technologies that are out there, design approaches, ideas for restoring, using nature in a restorative manner to help build resilience. So there is plenty to be hopeful for, but we can't waste any more time, right? We just can't waste any more time being disunited. Accept the reality, accept the science, and then get on with the hard work.
So with that kind of getting on part, what are your next steps with this? What can we expect to see in kind of the next 6 months to 12 months?
We've got a lot of next steps. So this is the adaptation side of the climate challenge. We'll be doing some more work on the mitigation side in the next few months. Mitigation being reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from the department. So you'll see some work on that. You will see some continued effort to expand the utility and functionality of the DCAT that Dr. White talked about. You're going to, there's a lot of internal boring bureaucratic stuff, implementation plans and assigning offices of primary responsibility and going through the budget process. So those are all the things that we're going to be working on in the next 6 months. But we do have, I'd encourage your members to take a look. We've got a lot of climate information up. We've got the DCAT. We've got an annex to the DCAT in terms of, we've got the DCAT up, the reports from the DCAT. We've got the Defense Climate Adaptation Plan up. We've got an annex to the Climate Adaptation Plan that shows some real-world practical examples, which might be a good place to start for some of the communities. Other colleagues in policy recently published the Defense Climate Risk Assessment, which talks about sort of the strategic environment that our forces are going to face in the future. So there's plenty of literature out there that's going to guide our work for the next few months, years.
Well, I think that's really the only questions I had for you today. ADC is going to have our next national summit here in DC this coming March. And we'd love to have both of you come and talk at that event about where you're at in the process by the time March comes around, and as our members begin to do their Hill visits and really begin our process for looking at the next year's National Defense Authorization Act. How can we be useful? How can we start leveraging your tools to make sure our communities and installations are receiving the policy and funding that they need from Congress? So something to think about. I'd love to have you there if you're available to come down to the summit in March. I'll get you some information on that. But any questions for me before?
Yeah, I mean, I know that we're already tracking the ADC event. There will be a speaker who will talk about climate change and climate resilience. So who that is, I don't know, but there will be the presence from the department, and this subject will be discussed.
And if I could just leave a couple thoughts here too. One is that people tend to think of all the climate interventions as being big and structural and expensive, but Mr. Kidd mentioned a number of different kinds that don't have to be big and expensive. They can include management plans, and they can include other kinds of interventions. The big idea is that there are many things that we should be doing. It's not just a one-shot deal here. And then the second is that the administration is taking a whole of government approach. So all the federal agencies have expanded their programs in this area. So your communities, for example, who might be suffering from urban heat island effects, can be tapping into other agencies where that's the main issue. If you've got wildfire, smoke, particulate, and health impacts, you can tap into the HHS types of action. So I think if you can tap into the whole of government approach as well as the DOD approach, then this will get you a real solution for all the problems that you're facing.
We've worked with some pretty smart folks here recently to develop a new guidebook of our own about all of the different types of tools available to climates and installations for this effort. I'd love to share that with you, get your thoughts on that, but it's been out for probably the past few months. All right. Well, thank you both so much.